Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. I'm trying to wrap up the DRO installation here on the Kearney Trecker 2HL, and the last component I need to make here is a mount for the scale here on the knee up and down vertical axis. I'd say Z-axis, but people complain because it's a horizontal mill and it's not really the Z-axis, because the Z-axis would be the vertical axis. So I figured this piece of 1/8 inch aluminum flat bar should be good enough to mount this. It doesn't really need to be too strong. It just needs to be strong enough. It really only needs to be as long as the scale itself plus a little bit, because I'm going to need to have some room to put the end caps on it for the guard that goes over top of the scale. I rough cut this to length over on the bandsaw, and now I want to clean up the cut edge just so it's a little bit neater. I'll use this nicely out of focus end mill here to clean up the end of the flat bar. Well, I did some calculations here manually, and I've got the positions of where I need to drill the holes here written actually on the flat bar, but they're referenced from the center and the edge here. So I'll use the edge finder to find the center of the flat bar and then the far right edge. Well, since I want these holes to be as precise as possible, I decided to switch out for some in-focus drills and tools, and the anchor lube certainly helps clear up any of the stray out-of-focus areas. So I'm drilling and tapping these to mount the scale to this piece of flat bar, and I'll tap these for 1024. Well, as you can see here, I went back to the tools that were out of focus because after drilling that first hole, I realized it was in the wrong spot, so I had to drill it again. Now, when I move down here to the left side of the bar, I have it positioned in the correct location, even though I'm using the anchor lube, it didn't really clear things up much at all. Well, you can see here where I drilled a second hole because that first hole that was directly in the center should have been moved over. Oh well, I don't think it'll get in the way. But now I need to drill the 2 holes that will mount this flat bar to the standoffs that we made in the last video. I'm also drilling a hole directly in the center between these 2 mounting holes. Now this serves no functional purpose other than giving me access to the socket head cap screw that attaches the standoffs to the T-slot there on the knee. This just makes it easier that if I do have to adjust those standoffs, I don't have to take off the mounting bracket or this piece of flat bar. I can just put a Allen key through this hole and into the socket head cap screw and loosen it, maybe adjust it, and then tighten it again. I'll chamfer these holes real quick and then I will repeat this process down at the other end of the flat bar. Well, there's a lot more flex in this bar here than I was expecting, so I'm going to bring in another machinist jack to give it some support. I did forget that I need to chamfer these holes a little deeper for the countersunk screws that will attach this to those standoffs. So I need to run this down a little bit deeper. I'm setting the quill stop so that all of these are countersunk to the same depth. Here's the finished bracket. Off camera, I went ahead and drilled and tapped some holes for the guard that will cover over top of the scale. Well, unfortunately, what I don't like is that this material is a little bit thin, so the scale kind of hangs off on one end, and that's to accommodate the guard. I did some of these calculations manually and screwed up a little bit in the beginning, but I think it'll still be mostly functional. Well, who am I kidding? This thing's junk. I was so disappointed with how it came out that I made another one. And this time I made it out of the same 1/4-inch material I had been using. I got wider 2-inch material versus 1.5 inch, and this should fit on those standoff brackets exactly how it intended. And part of that's because instead of just trying to do this stuff in my head, which is always a mistake, I went ahead and did a drawing and did proper dimensions that I could constantly refer to. And that's where I made a mistake. So this is going to serve me a lot better. Let's go over to the machine and we'll get it mounted. Well, this bracket is held on to the standoffs here with a couple of 1024 countersunk screws. And here you can see how that center hole will make it easy for me to adjust these standoffs if necessary. DRO scales are bidirectional. It doesn't really matter which way you mount them. I'm trying to figure out here, should I mount it with the cable going up or the cable going down? I think with the cable going up, it might put a little bit too much pressure on it, on the reader head. I really don't like that. So I think I'm going to mount it this way. So I've got some 1024 socket head cap screws, and we'll mount this to the bracket. For now, I'm just mounting this to line up the edge of the scale with the edge of the bracket I just made. I'll come back here later with a dial indicator, get it all dialed in once we've mounted the reader head. I'm mounting the guard here just temporarily, just to make sure that nothing is going to be interfering with it and that it seems to be not interfering with the cable for the reader head. That was one of my bigger concerns. I think we can work around that though. The next thing to do is to figure out how I'm going to mount the reader head to the bracket that rides up and down on the knee. I don't think this is going to be too complicated, just because of the way that I've made everything else so far. I think I can use one of the stock brackets that came with the DRO scales, and I should be able to get away with only using the one bracket. It won't be as complicated, I think, as the other brackets here. So I'm going to mount this to the reader head just to kind of get an idea of what I need to do next. Yeah, I think this is going to work out fine. I need to modify this bracket so I can mount it to the piece that is riding on the knee and add some adjustability in that area. So I think I'll need to take this off of here and mill some slots in it, and we'll go from there. I have a piece of scrap aluminum that I'm putting up underneath this bracket as I mount it in the milling vise on the Bridgeport. It's going to get damaged and get tossed, but it's just there to protect the vise jaws here from being damaged by the end mill, because I'm going to be milling away a good chunk of this side of the bracket. I'm going to start by shortening up the bracket. It doesn't need to be this long. Well, while I have it here in the vise, I'm going to narrow the width. This is really just purely aesthetic and non-functional, but while I have it, I might as well try to make it look a little bit better than it is. The last thing I need to do with the bracket here is to mill a couple of slots, and this just gives me some adjustability in this axis. The stock angle bracket that came with the DRO scale will get mounted here to this bracket that's attached to the side of the knee. And to do that, I need to drill and tap for some 1024 socketed cap screws. Well, the only thing that's a bit wonky about this setup is the stock angle bracket here needs to get mounted to the back of the knee DRO bracket. So I have to have the knee in a position that gives me enough room to get back here with my fat fingers in order to thread in these screws. Now I'm going to leave these loose here until I mount the reader head to the other side of this, but before I can do that, I need to go ahead and put that vertical piece back on and mount the DRO scale again. I have the DRO scale mounted back on the knee. Now I just need to thread these socketed cap screws into the reader head. Unfortunately, I didn't have washers that were the right OD that would, cover the slot with the right ID for these little metric screws, so I ended up having to double them up. I'm going to hold that angle bracket nice and tight to the knee bracket while I tighten down these metric screws just to make sure everything is lined up where it needs to be. With those screws nice and tight, I need to move the knee back down now to a position where I can get back behind it with an Allen key and tighten up those other screws that go into the knee bracket. With everything tight, I can remove this red alignment spacer. Off camera, I went ahead and reinstalled the guard for the scale and the end caps. And so now I should be able to take this for a little drive and see how it's doing. I'm using the rapid traverse on the machine just to make this a little bit easier, and I am getting movement on the vertical scale, which I'm labeling Z. You can label yours whatever you want, and the distance traveled looks correct. I will have to get out a dial indicator just to make sure that this is actually reading what I expect it to, but so far everything is looking good. And you can see here that the X, Y, and Z scales are all operating. They're actually reading the values I expect them to. So far this has been a complete success. I will have to double check everything with some accurate dial indicators, and that'll take a little bit of time, and I'll do that off camera. I still have to spend some time cleaning up these cables and making a mount for the display, but I think I'm going to be changing the display out to something a little bit bigger, and also I think I'm going to be changing a little bit of how these DRO cables are routed. And that's going to have to wait for another video though, because I've just kind of run out of time on this one. But as always, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and I thank you for sticking around. If you're a subscriber, a big thank you to you. If you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. You hit the bell icon, you know when I produce another video, and you'll see how this thing ends up turning out. And a special thank you to all those that help support the channel on Patreon or through PayPal. I would not be able to do this without you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.